Welcome everybody to episode 2 of the Enhanced Pod, and in today's discussion I've got my evergreen co-host with me, Brett Phillips. He's going to be leading our discussion today, so without further ado I'm going to let him jump straight in.
Morning guys, welcome back to the Enhanced Pod, episode 2. I hope episode 1 was reasonable. Cool. So today we're talking about a topic that is, I think, not just close to my heart and not just close to Nick's heart, but actually effectively close to every physio's heart. We're going to be talking about the ability to progress your career in physiotherapy. And, you know, I sort of refer to it as late 20s syndrome. But if we think about physio as a sort of, as a career and as a profession, in comparison to other professions, we've really basically only got two options. You're either a clinician or you're an owner of a practice who employs clinicians and potentially works as a clinician themselves. And I think what we generally see in most people is you finish ComServe, you start a job, whether you're lucky enough to get a job in your chosen area or whether you take whatever's available. You work for a couple of years, gain skills, are happy in your job, and then you generally reach your latter 20s where you've seen no signs of career progression, you haven't had any improvements or increases in your salary, and then you get to the sticking point of what now? I'm 28, I'm still earning the same that I was earning when I was 23. I might have completed a master's or an OMT1 or an SPT1 or something along those lines, and yet I've seen no sort of tangible career progression. So Nick, I know this is something that you feel very strongly about, the sort of low ceiling for career and financial progression in physiotherapy. What was your experience in your sort of 20s hitting this wall, and what sort of guided
I think
your thoughts
referring to it as late 20s syndrome is probably pretty accurate, Brett, just because I think it's something that everybody goes through, especially like in the 25 to 30 kind of age group. But I don't want to paint this doom and gloom picture, although that does sell them and probably get some good clips from it. But I want people to kind of feel a little bit empowered, and I want them to know that it's all up to them. And like you mentioned, doing OMT, especially doing a master's, etc. I think upskilling yourself, you'll never go wrong doing that. So that's the first thing. The picture that I want to paint for people is that it's not all doom and gloom. I think the ball is in your court and it's in your hands that you can do as much or as little as you want to. But if it is a concern to you, which it is for so many people, we have to spend the time, effort, energy upskilling ourselves as clinicians. One, with valuable clinical skills that we can leverage for better remuneration. And then 2, upskilling ourselves from a business point of view, because there's also different business options that we should look into to try and create more value, which gets us paid more in our clinic. I would also challenge at the same time business owners, right? And just remember the context. We're pumping out graduates year on year on year. So it's replacing people that are commission earners is not a hard thing to do. As much as it's great to have a good person, it's also on the business owner to make sure that there's a pathway through the practice for your employees. So we need to get a bit more creative with the way that we do our business model. How do we scale the business and give our staff more of a stake? But there's a segue again here. So this whole conversation has so much context to it and subtleties. And I feel like I've been on both ends, where I've been a clinician trying to buy into a practice, going through a whole valuation phase, looking at the numbers, speaking to people, doing the maths against, okay, well, what would it cost me to start up on my own, etc. Now I'm an employer of almost, this is my 9th year, I'm heading to 10 years. How do I scale the business? How do I keep people in it? How do I keep incentivizing them? And then when you do find a good physio, because there's lots of them who are upskilling themselves and making a really valuable contribution, how do you grow your business so you can grow it with them? And I think the fear for a lot of business owners is that, okay, I've built this business and it's worth, we turn over X amount of money or whatever. I can't just hand over a stake to that person to operate a small portion of it. That actually doesn't make business sense. But I want to challenge everybody to think like entrepreneurs. If you think of entrepreneurship, right? So you've got a great physio. They're super valuable. They can bring new clients. They can open a new branch. They can basically help you scale your business into a new domain. If you've got people like that, it's a win-win for everybody because it's going to grow your business. You're going to give them a piece, and it's better for the employee to do that and own a piece of a new venture under a bigger umbrella than forking out all the capital to start out on their own, essentially. So there are ways around it. We all just have to get creative, and it probably takes a lot of, brave conversations, honest conversations, which sometimes people aren't willing to have with employers because sometimes employers aren't willing to listen. Sometimes employers don't build enough rapport or communicate well enough to kind of outline all these things. Sometimes employees or clinicians don't feel comfortable or confident enough to speak about remuneration without sounding like they're ungrateful or they're about to leave or et cetera, et cetera. So there's so much subtlety and nuance to this conversation, but I choose to live in a world where it is possible. It is possible to be a good employer. It is possible to create a valuable service to your clients, to charge whatever premium you choose to charge for that, to grow your business, to give people a stake in it, to have a pathway for them within it. I think you can do it all. It just takes a lot of work and upskilling ourselves, particularly on the business side of things.
I mean, that's an interesting point that it's, in order to sort of build career pathways, it's not just about looking at the clinician, it's also about looking at the employer. I was listening to a podcast the other day, actually, and it was I think it was Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos who said they look for people who can take the business forward, and they incentivize it by giving them a stake within the business. I mean, obviously, if you're working for 10 hours a day, there's only 10 hours a day, and if you're getting 45% of whatever you're seeing, that's one sort of basic strand of motivation. But if you were added onto that a stake within the business, or at least the prospect of developing a stake within the business, I think that's already an inherent motivation to the employee to keep pushing. And as you say, from a business point of view, it doesn't make sense if they were just going to take a stake of an existing practice. But if they were the type of person that was going to run with it and grow whatever their contribution to the practice was, you end up giving away a small percentage, but a small percentage of something bigger than it was in its pre-existing state. So, I mean, it's an interesting one because from what I've seen in my time as a physio, what's it been? It's probably 12 or 13 years, is when it comes to things like this, the older school physios are extremely tribal and very, very, what's the word? Sort of cling onto their practice as if it's their baby, which it is, and they've built it and all that sort of stuff. But I've seen so many older clinicians who've been practice owners for 20, 25 years. They employ high potential young physios. The young physios develop late 20s syndrome, ask for a stake in the business or ask for an increased percentage remuneration, get declined because it becomes a low-key flex and a bit of a power play. Young physio says, well, bugger this, I'm not going to stay in serfdom for the rest of my life, branch out on their own. And the original practice owner ends up losing a third or half of their practice because all of that clinicians' clients go with them 10 kilometers down the road to wherever they've set up camp. So then you've got a situation where relationships break down and the original practice owner has lost a massive stake of their business, whereas if they'd actually just thought progressively, incentivized the employees' sort of work and ability to take something forward, they wouldn't have lost half their practice. The other person wouldn't have had to have been forced into becoming a business owner if they didn't want to be one. And everything could have sort of continued hunky-dory in the original setting, and it could have just grown from strength to strength. So, I mean, it's bizarre because you see people shooting themselves in the foot, clinging on to 5% of something. That
what I'm thinking when you say that, Brett, is that sometimes it's also not necessarily better for the employee to go out on their own because now they face all the risk of business and uncertainty of business where you've now got to take out, you've got to rent somewhere or buy a premises, you've got to kit the practice out, shop fittings, but there's different licensing, there's practice software, there's all sorts of add-ons that come with it. But I think, and again, I can criticize both sides of that paradigm, to the nth degree because I feel like I've been there. But sometimes the back of the napkin maths that you do when you're a commission earner and you go, well, okay, I'm getting 40% of this. I can make 100% of this when I do it on my own. But if you don't set the business up properly, you could actually take home less if your expenses don't match. And if you're not seeing a certain amount of clients to then offset, now we start to think of a concept of like cash flow and margin.
Yeah.
If your cash flow is not good and you're letting everybody pay by EFT and medical aid and there's a lag time on that, but your rent is due and your expenses are due and whatever at a set point in the month, you can end up worse off than you were before. So doing it under the safety of an established business sometimes is actually better. But the frustration in having that conversation and it not going well kind of leads people to just sort of go, well, I'm going to take my chances and I'm going to go out on my own. And I think then we end up in where we are now, 2025, where if you look at the amount of single physio practices, right, it's my name and my business and I'm the only person that works in it. But now I'm in the trap of, well, if I'm sick or if I don't work, there's no income for the business. I can't take leave, right? Then you get into different life phases where your responsibilities change. You get married or you have kids or your responsibilities sort of grow over time as you do. All of a sudden, that single person business is a massive source of stress for you because, it's actually not better than I was off before, but now, okay, what are my other options? And then I see people pivot into all sorts of stuff. You leave the country, you go in search of stronger currency maybe. I've seen physios leave the field to go into like medical tech and reps where you salary based. It's probably a little bit better salary based, but then you are traveling. You're not actually practicing as a clinician. You're doing all sorts of other things. So, yeah, there's so many paths to this discussion. But yeah, it really takes a lot of consideration, and every context, I guess, is also unique. But I think we just want to highlight the context around it so that people can make more informed decisions going forward, or take it to their boss, or as a owner listening to this, maybe you want to think about how you can do it differently because I've got some really great employees. I have to grow this business because I can't do the same thing for 20 years. Eventually, someone's going to outcompete you in the market space, right? Maybe your competitive advantage is adapting, pivoting, growing, giving people a stake, but safeguarding yourself throughout that process. So yeah, there's so much to this.
I mean, I think the back of the napkin maths that you mentioned is such a it's what do you call it? A mirage. You sort of see these numbers on the napkin, and you think, fuck, that's what I could be earning, and all of a sudden it kind of captures your imagination, and then you actually live it, and it's really not what that napkin said it was going to be, and you end up.
No. You do the maths and you go like, okay, well, there's X amount of patients coming through this practice every single month. Well, I do the cost of like what a full session is. Okay, whoa, this place must be making so much money. I can guarantee you when you try and think of the expenses and you go like, oh, okay, well, it's rent and it's my salary and whatever, you will probably miss like 5 to 10 monthly expenses that you can't even see on face. Exactly, on face value from just being a operator, not an owner. So there's a lot of context to it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
The napkin only has space for the income.
Yeah.
I don't think
there's only upside on the napkin. There's no downside.
But I mean, I think exactly, and I think that's where, as you say, it's not really, maybe this discussion isn't necessarily providing solutions, but it's highlighting the problem. And I think if you think about that napkin scenario, eventually the person who is writing on that napkin is going to get into their own space and realize that, maybe the napkin didn't tell the true story. And the clinician, the employer that they're leaving, would have lost a good employee that they had a good relationship with, that was doing well for the original business, and potentially they've both ended up losing out. One because they didn't want to give a little bit and they weren't incentivizing performance, and the other one because they believed the napkin and maybe this dream that the napkin told them, and they ended up down the road realizing that it's not necessarily as easy as it looks. If everyone could make 250,000 rand a month seeing 10 patients a day, then the whole world, then physio would be one of the most lucrative careers around, and everyone would be living their best life, which I can assuredly say that they are not, because I'm one of those not living our best lives. So it's It's one of those things where both parties are
Yeah.
potentially cutting off a little bit of their nose to spite their face in the
And Brett, let me
in the
just put it
hopes
into
of
even
developing something
a global
significant.
context so everybody can understand it. This is not a uniquely South African problem either. You go look at like forums and social media and connect with
Absolutely.
physios in other countries, first world countries, the UK, Canada, Australia, elsewhere. It's the same. It's the same shortcomings for this clinician business owner sort of dynamic everywhere. I've read blogs from people in Canada that highlight exactly the same things that we are experiencing here. So also, like, maybe fear not. It's not a South African thing. Just because you leave the country doesn't mean you're going to avoid these problems forever, right? So if you believe you're in a situation that's worth fighting for, explore these options first, and then kind of see where you end up. And I think I feel like I've got a lot of good context because I've been through that evaluation process of trying to buy into a practice, weighing that up against doing my own thing. Now kind of
On
like
both sides.
scaling, going to 2 sites or 3 sites or doing multiple things, scaling back again, finding the right people, having the wrong people, all sorts of ebbs and flows, which we'll get into in the webinar coming up. But yeah, there's, like I said, there's a lot of nuances to this conversation.
I think what's interesting as well is we're looking at it from the individual person's benefit slash sort of whether they can benefit or whether they're going to come off worse as the employer or as the employee. But if you actually sort of pull back and look at it from a bigger picture, you mentioned a lot of one-man shows that pop up, so like single-person practices. So let's look at a situation where there's 10 single-person practices in an area. Effectively there you've diluted the physio capital in that region 10 ways. So you're going to have 10 individuals who are probably practicing from a second bedroom in their house or potentially the cheapest rental space that they could find because they're starting out the napkin, they forgot to add expenses or maybe the expenses looked a little bit more sort of rosy on their napkin. And you've eventually then got a situation where you've got 10 potentially good physios working out of what could be described as sub-optimum spaces if you think about the standard of care that they're actually providing to their patients as well. Imagine a situation where you combined the capital of those 10 individual practices under one umbrella. Imagine the institution that you could develop with that capital in terms of rehab space, gym equipment, use of technology. I mean, we'll talk about that probably in a couple of weeks' time on the podcast. But think about, if there was one practice with 10 clinicians all having a vested stake in the business, imagine the sort of the organization you could put together and the resources that you could actually have that would allow you to provide a much higher quality of care than one individual in their second bedroom with a portable plinth and a goniometer kicking about in terms of the actual standard of rehab. I mean, if you look at some of these follow a few oaks in America, these doctors of physical therapy, the old DBT oaks, and a few of them work out of such cool facilities, big gym spaces. I mean, look at your setup there at Hilton. You've got access to a hell of a lot more than you would have access to compared to if you were in a sort of strip mall little broom cupboard room or second bedroom in your house. So I mean, that's the other thing. If these like one-man shows keep popping up because late 20 physios are kind of trying to establish their own little niche, it's going to take 5 to 10 years before they can actually get into a facility that will provide a higher standard of care. Whereas if they actually worked within an established brand, you could probably grow the standard of care a hell of a lot quicker and have a hell of a lot more sustainable organization for the patients actually as well. So I mean, we've spoken about it in terms of the personal benefits to the employer or employee, but I think there's also a huge kind of knock-on effect to the standard of care that people get because
absolutely.
of this
And
type of
you know
mentality
what?
that everyone has.
If you think of orthopedic surgeon groups, or if you think of like people in my area that I think about, like radiology groups and anesthetic groups, there's much larger sort of, like, I want to say, incorporations or partnerships, or like, where it's a whole host of names. It's Phillips, Pereira, Smith and Jones, anesthetics practice or orthopedics practice or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's precedent in the medical field to get it right. I just don't understand why so many it's not super common in physios to get that piece right. And maybe it's the thing where the relationships break down because we open up a practice 10 k's away from our previous employer. Now we dilute the market share. Now the relationship between the two have sort of has deteriorated, and now we compete against each other instead of pooling our forces, kind of doing something much bigger than each of us could do on our own. But again, I don't know why it's such a uniquely physio situation that we globally don't seem to have, we don't really seem to have a really well thought of solution for this. And for the people that have solved it already, like, I would love for them to come out and share this information. But again, they're not incentivized to do that because they're doing well and they're okay. But I think I don't want to see unhappy physios. I don't want to see disillusioned physios. I don't want to see, like, I do the maths from my undergraduate class, how many people are still practicing it as physios, how many people are even still in the country. And the numbers are scary. And you think about, that was a graduate class of like maybe high 30s or something. You're getting like 50 plus students per year graduating at physio. So the pool is just growing and growing. In my next 10 years of owning my business, when I get to 20 years, the landscape is going to be completely different again. If we don't find a sustainable solution for the long term, I would assume that what we're currently in is probably just going to get worse.
Yeah, and I think you also nailed it there by just talking about, like, you mentioned it in recently when we were chatting about, like, sort of practitioners falling out of love with their profession. And I think that sort of late 20s to early 30s, this period of time is where a lot of people do make the transition because they can't see the wood for the trees. And, burnout hits, lack of financial remuneration hits, and then it ends up with people either clearing out of the profession or just continuing but hating every day at work and feeling like they're not really getting anywhere. To sort of round up the discussion, I mean, basically, you've gone through this on both sides of the fence. You've had a bit of late 20s syndrome. You've been on the employee side. You've now shifted into the employer side quite a while ago. What sort of key take-homes from your own experience would you say, just briefly? I know we'll discuss this a lot more in the webinar that's coming up, but, like, in your own experience, what did you find was important going through that transition, and what sort of
I think we really need to come to terms with and feel at ease with the fact that we don't have the business acumen or intellect coming straight out of university. So you need to spend time learning about the business of physio, the business of healthcare, medical aids, cash payments, how quickly do payments come in. There's so many parts of the non-clinical physio that you need to upskill yourself in or understand before you are probably ready to take the next step. You can jump in and figure it out if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that approach, but you then really need to dive into that rabbit hole. So I would say, if your long-term plan is to go that route, start upskilling yourself as soon as possible, right? So that's the first thing. Like, prepare before you need to take the jump. The second thing I would also say, I think, and I had this, I'm not criticizing young graduates. Let me say I'm criticizing Nick of 10, 20, whatever. When did I graduate? No, yeah. I'm definitely still in that phase where, like, it's more than 10, but I can't actually think of the number off the top of my head very quickly. But Nick of, let's say, ComServe. I think there's like an entitlement of, like, I've got my degree, I need to now earn. And you earn a livable wage for a 20-something when you are a ComServe, which is great. But then it's like this false pretense where you then, if you don't get employed by the state, you then fall into private practice, and you almost like take a step back, and then it's like, whoa, but I've got this degree. My parents and my lecturers and the University of Cape Town or wherever told you that this thing is super valuable. Why am I not earning, right? You got to play the long game. If you plan on being a physio till you're 60, there's things that you also just need to be around physios that have been in practice for that long to know, whoa, there is a big gap in my skill set. And physio, the clinical part of physio is sometimes a game of iterations. You need to see lots of different conditions to get good at it, right? Again, if you want to shorten your learning curve, you're probably better off diving into one sort of field like we have in terms of MSK, orthopedics, sports injuries. Like, that's a very neat or neuromusculoskeletal, whatever you want to lump it in. But it's a very neat umbrella that you can pack it into. If you're doing ICU and pediatrics and a bit of neurology and orthopedics, you're never going to grow deep enough knowledge in all of those simultaneously to have enough leverage for your own clinical skill set to demand really good remunerative rates, if that makes sense. So I think we should also consider picking something that we've got a genuine interest in, and then trying to like dive really deep into that sort of field. And I've hit these little walls myself where I'm like, ooh, maybe I need to pivot to this, maybe I need to pivot to that. And every time I have that thought, you can find a way to kind of dive deeper into the current setting that you're in. So this trend that I've been going through for the last couple of years now of like looking at how to integrate technology. It might not pay me more immediately, but it's growing my knowledge, growing my skill set. You add a master's on there, which really teaches you to be a critical thinker and a problem solver. You bring that to your clinical setting. You add some business acumen. You add a bit of like personal skills and development. How do I speak to people? How do I set up grow my relationships with the people that I work with, my colleagues, the people that I rent from, the other medical professionals in my network. You do those over a long enough time span with specific knowledge in this NMS that I do. I've added a niche thing like, okay, I'm the technology guy. I know how to use force plates, and I know how to use dynamometry. I can periodize rehab programs really well. I can do very thorough return to play or whatever it might be. Now you've got a valuable skill set that you can leverage either to your employer or to your clients when you do your own practice. So I think, one, we need to dive deeper into making ourselves better physios first, right? But on the back of that, we also need to be better business people and just realize that there is a massive gap coming out of undergrad where we don't know how business works, and we need to spend the time, effort, energy to upskilling ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, just sidebar. I mean, one of the things that I've tried to do with EduPro since starting is to incorporate some form of entrepreneur or business-related content from the start. We've done marketing courses. We've done some of the practice startup courses that you've done, growing a practice, the business side of things. Because if you look at the sort of upskilling landscape within physio, it's always about manual therapy, where to put your fingers when you're manipulating a neck, how to do a Mulligan's mob on an elbow, and all of those things, and they're relevant skills. But if you actually think about it, there's a serious shortage or dearth of educational content from the business point of view, and it's not easy to run a business. That's why there are MBAs in the world. That's why there are business schools at every university. And we think because we can do a killer shoulder mode that we're going to automatically be a good business person, and we're going to do the napkin stuff, we're going to head off down the road and our life's going to be rosy. And then you get there and you realize that you're still doing a killer shoulder mode, but maybe your business skills are a bit cuck, and somewhere along the lines you should have actually upskilled a little bit. So yeah, I mean, if this kind of discussion is something that floats your boat, just to the listeners now, Nick's got a webinar coming up on Tuesday, actually, next Tuesday, called Building a Career in Physiotherapy. In terms of the discussion, it's basically going to be a fleshed out version of what we've discussed today. Nick will provide you with a few sort of key sort of progression pathways that he's realized in his career. He'll talk about his sort of 10 to 12 or 13, or according to him, 20-year journey from sort of post-conserve young physio entering private practice to where he is now employing others. Nick, anything else you want to sort of add regarding the upcoming?
Yeah, I just want to, I think let's put a pin in it there. Like, this is a rabbit hole that you can dive really deep into, but I think people also underestimate the value of connecting with people via social media, following businesses. You know, I can pick a physio practice in Joburg and follow them and go to their website and try and figure out what it is that they're doing and why are they doing so well. I think that's something that people don't really do. I get cold messages from people all the time, but they haven't. It's very clear that they haven't really taken the time to look at what we actually do as a physio practice. But all the information is out there. Like, for my practice, we've got a YouTube page, a Instagram, a LinkedIn. Like, there's so many resources where you can hear me speak about these things. The thing is, there's resources. We just need to learn to be more resourceful. But rounding off, whether you're listening to this before that webinar goes live, or whether you are listening to this sometime through the 2025 year, just remember that webinar is going to be hosted online, eduprohealth.co.za, and you can get access to it and do it, one, to upskill yourself with knowledge, and then I think the cherry on top is just that you'll get some CPD points for it as well, which is useful for this whole cycle thing. Refer back to our conversation last week, but yeah, this piece is going to live on the internet forever, so you can have at it whenever you want to, but that webinar you can access for the remainder of the 2025 calendar year. So I look forward to discussing and interacting with people more around this. I'd love to engage more. You can drop me an email, you can connect with me on social platforms, or we can catch up when we are going through the webinar this week coming.
Amazing. Cool, guys. Thanks for listening. I hope that was a reasonably entertaining discussion. I think it is going to resonate with people, because I don't know a physio who's 30 years old who hasn't engaged with this concept to some extent in their own career and in their own life. I think it resonates with most physios that I know, if not all. So yeah, thanks a lot, Nick, for your insights this morning. Looking forward to Tuesday. I think it's going to be nice to delve into this for 2 hours, because as you say, it's a topic with so many rabbit holes. You could go absolutely nuts.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining in the pod, everybody, and we'll see you again